Alex Seymour, welcome, and thank you very much indeed for agreeing to be a part of the Breaking Through the Void Summit. It's a pleasure to have you here today. So Alex, I would like to just read your bio, just to let people know a little bit about you if they haven't heard of you yet and heard of your amazing book, and then we'll get started with our interview. So Alex served in the Royal Marine Commandos for 6 years and completed 2 tours of duty on active service. He returned to serve as a reservist and a sucker for punishment 20 years later as the oldest frontline commando in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, earning the dubious accolade of being the only man who left the Marine for 20 years and came back for a war. After returning from a tour of duty during the war in Afghanistan, he needed a way to cope with the extremes he experienced in the war, losing 7 men in his unit and having his best friend critically injured by a Taliban bomb. Drawing upon his pre-deployment experiences with DMT and psilocybin/magic mushrooms, immediately following service in Helmand, he knew that entheogens could help him release his fears and traumas. But he also knew that simply taking psychedelics wasn't enough. He needed ceremony, something sacred to draw meaning from his experiences, to help him reassess not only the war and his role in it, but his entire life. So he set out for the Amazon in search of the hallucinogenic brew known as Ayahuasca and a shaman to guide him. And his book, Psychedelic Marine, tells of that story. So, yeah, it is an incredible story. I've read your book, and it's like nothing else, really. And I think it ties in really beautifully with the theme of the summit, which of course is breaking through the void. Because, well, what struck me from reading the book is that you really broke out of the void that you found yourself in, and the place where you were sort of stuck and dissatisfied with life. And actually went on to do, very extreme things that most people may not do. But I think it's quite an inspiring story about, doing something different and actually just doing something, which so many of us can be fearful of doing. We're all scared of change and so on. So enough of me talking. Maybe you could just summarize for everyone and sort of tell me a little bit about yourself and about how the story came about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Julia. Very pleased to be here. And that's quite an introduction. So hopefully I'll live up to those expectations. We'll see. But in essence, I'm just a normal guy. Been happily married for the last 20 years, got 2 lovely children. And for the last 20 years, I worked for large corporate IT enterprises. So for the last 3 businesses, each one of them has turned over $30 billion a year annually in revenue, and things were becoming more and more complex. I was working to stricter deadlines. There were new product launches. There was new technology. I was working in business development, and I found myself working to another person's agenda, an organization's agenda, and I was becoming increasingly dissatisfied. And so, as you rightly put it, I did something fairly extreme, and I left it behind, and temporarily left my family behind as well, for all intents and purposes, for practically a year, and rejoined the Marines and joined my old unit, which is 4-2 Commando, and we were posted to Helmand in Afghanistan. And then after that, I did something that is fairly unusual. I'd never heard about it being done, before, certainly. And in as much as, instead of taking another beach holiday, I took some proper time off. You could call it a sabbatical. You could call it, a decent break, but it certainly, wasn't a holiday. And I went to the Amazon, and I ended up living with a number of Indians and a number of Indian tribes, and consuming their brew, which is called Ayahuasca, as you mentioned before. And this is a very, very powerful and potent, but safe psychedelic. And the whole process and experience was transformational for me. It was, revelationary. So yes, that's basically me and the book in a nutshell.
Okay. And why ayahuasca? Why was that your method of going and getting over the war?
Well, I mean, I'd experimented with entheogens before and different psychedelics before, and there was a BBC TV presenter called Bruce Parry, who was a former Royal Marines officer, who was filmed in a series called Tribe. It was watched by about 10 million people, and he did an episode where he went to the Amazon and he consumed ayahuasca in a shamanic healing ceremony with the Indians, and that's what sparked my interest. And I thought, okay, well, instead of going on another beach holiday after the war, what I really, really needed to do was to, have a much deeper, a much more healing, a much more profound experience. And, I'd done my research extensively, and I knew that ayahuasca can have this effect on people in terms of, helping and enabling people, free of their anxieties, traumas, increasing happiness and overall well-being. So that was just what I needed.
Okay. I mean, again, to someone like me, and probably many of the people listening, it probably sounds like a very extreme way of healing. And yet your book describes that it was indeed a very cathartic and healing process for you. Could you talk us through that? And I guess what an ayahuasca ceremony is like for people that don't know it. Maybe start with that, and then just touch upon how it affected you and what you got.
Yeah, well, it certainly, and it might help to talk about some of the events that led me to that. And I'll certainly happily talk about, what an ayahuasca ceremony entails. But, the context and the background at the time was not only was, I was very dissatisfied, with this kind of rut that I was in professionally, career-wise, but also there was an existential threat as well. So we've been attacked, as you know, World Trade Center, London bombings, by terrorists. So, I saw myself and having this opportunity really to go and, do my bit for my country. My grandparents had done the same thing, and it was something that was, I really felt was something deep in my DNA that drove me to do it. But of course, when you get out there, all the training in the world can't really prepare you for the actual war itself, and it's very extreme. So there's an extreme weight of kit that you're carrying, about 120 pounds worth of kit, extreme heat, 40 degrees Celsius a day, that's about 120 degrees Fahrenheit, extreme lack of sleep, there's no days off. And of course, there's all the danger, there's snipers, IEDs. 7 men in my unit got killed. My best friend, called JJ, he was critically wounded and blown up by a Taliban bomb, searching a Taliban bomb-making factory. And it's just a crazy, crazy place where, you're literally in survival mode all the time. And you have to be really paranoid just to survive and be alerting your team every single day. And it's like, you're existing to all intents and purposes like a beast in the wild, and it's very, very intense. And some days, for example, I'd walk over an unexploded IED, a couple of times, and then the next day a truck would drive over it and blow it to smithereens. Or I'd be on a patrol one day and you could hear the chatter of the Taliban commanders that over the radio, because we had access to their radio network and they didn't realize. And you could hear them making plans through our interpreter about how they're planning to attack and kill us, and that's absolutely riveting and mesmerizing to listen to that information, because, you have to address that threat before they kill you. So having, that existence for 6 months, I really wanted to do something special and something profound and deeply healing, because by the time I got to Afghanistan, by the time I got to the Amazon, straight from Afghanistan, I was hyper alert. They call it hypervigilance. There was a tremendous amount of anxiety that was happening. Certainly, problems with insomnia. And I did wonder, what was it all for? And so having then immersed myself in the first shamanic ceremony with ayahuasca, it was just like this huge cleansing release, because I'd stayed for a week in a normal retreat, and this was a land-based retreat, and it was a conventional retreat where you have a ceremony and you're in a big wooden circular building called a maloka. There's a shaman there, and were lucky to have a master shaman, third generation. And there are 3 or 4 of us. It's always at night in pitch black. You drink the ayahuasca, and then you wait for 30 minutes for this brew to settle in your stomach. And it might be worth actually saying, for a moment, what ayahuasca is. It's simply a mix of a root and some leaves, and they boil that together in a tea, and then you just drink it. And after 30 minutes, it starts to have a psychotropic, psychedelic effect, and this washes over you. And invariably, most people then have some kind of, early on in the ceremony, a purging effect. So people, usually vomit. I know it sounds unpleasant, but they see this. When I say they, the indigenous Indians, they see this as a kind of a cleansing process that brings up all of the stuff that you need to get rid of and purge from your body. It's all part of the process. Now, in addition to all of this crazy psychedelia that's going on around you, the Indians are already singing these songs, and these songs are called icaros. And there's usually either a man singing them, or sometimes joined by the women. And the women are really, really tiny. They're about 4'8", 4'9", and they've got these incredibly high-pitched voices. And it's almost like these cartoonish kind of characters that are singing these, interwoven harmonies in another language, which are absolutely out of this world. And so it's like you're getting serenaded by, or you're having this blessing, and you can feel the energy and the vibrations of their songs literally going through you. And it's a very, very cleansing, very, very healing experience. And one of the things that it gives you is this higher sense of consciousness. You're into this other worldly state of consciousness. I suppose it's much like something like LSD or magic mushrooms, but there's certainly a sense of a presence there, something that's much more intelligent than you. And some people refer to it as Mother Ayahuasca. Some people would say it's God, but it's this higher sentience that your consciousness is merging with. And it could almost be the jungle and nature, but it's absolutely astonishing. And afterwards you just feel cleansed and calm, and it's just like having had a warm bath, and your mood is completely elevated. And so this is why it comes with a very, very strong recommendation from me, because in fact it comes with my highest recommendation. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Sounds amazing. It really does. So what did you learn about yourself from doing that? How did that help you, heal that void that had prompted you to go to war and then have this experience? You were in a place from the book where you felt very stuck and dissatisfied and so on, as we've said. And I want to know how that experience changed you and what you learned from that, and if it addressed that void. And I know that's lots of questions, so you can start with one and I'll try and remember the other.
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose the real transformational, transpersonal, enlightening change came about on the second part of the episode within the Amazon, because after I'd moved from the first retreat, I then went on to something called the Mythic Voyage, which was an incredible thing I'd never heard of. Basically, there was this great big overweight Greek polymath of a guy. For the last 6 years, he chartered a beautiful riverboat, and it had 18 cabins on it, and there were 20 other people, all wanting some kind of redemptive experience from their first world professional lives. And a lot of them just kept coming back and back. And the idea was that there were shaman on board this ship, and a troupe of tiny little female shaman called shamanas, and each night we'd go ashore via a canoe in a completely random place in the middle of the jungle. They would cut a ceremony space with machetes, and then we drink ayahuasca, but this time it was underneath the stars in the middle of the jungle, hundreds of miles from civilization. And these 7 tiny little shamana, female ayahuasqueros, they call them, female shaman, would sing these songs. And it was absolutely incredible. And it was almost like a spiritual experience. In fact, I would call it akin to a spiritual experience, because I'd never had, a really deeply profound spiritual experience before. You could say I was, an atheist or, an agnostic. I didn't have any strong feelings towards God or religion. All of that teaching, as far as I was concerned, had been wasted on me as a youth and a child. But here I was in the middle of the Amazon having this amazing experience. And so, after about a week or two of doing that, what it taught me, again, is to just, leave my fear at the door. It enabled me to just move on from the experience I had, which is very, very important for me in Afghanistan, and I got this sense of, the acronym for fear, false expectations appearing real, and it got even better than that. I felt myself becoming happier and happier. And Mikis, the man who kind of envisaged this whole mythic voyage trip, he used to say that, as human beings, we are self-programming beings of choice, and he kept on talking about, you're empowered as individuals to choose happiness if you want to. And so it was insights like that were very, very profound for me. And then, there was another level to I suppose you could call it enlightening experience where, I called it the 3 C's. There was a sense of comfort, there was a sense of compassion and creativity. And, I really did get a sense of this wonderful, comforting, mystical experience. If you used to say to 10 people in a room, who would like a mystical experience, in a safe setting, I'd imagine, at least 8, 9, maybe even 10 hands would go up, and not many people really do get to have that sense of something mystical, and it's a real comfort when you get that, to think that, when you die, your soul may go on somewhere else. Dying is just a process, and the fact that there's something else in other realms of existence where life continues, and that was a real comfort. And then there's the sense of compassion, not just towards yourself, which is something that I was getting back from having been to Afghanistan, but compassion, for my friends, my family, the people I met. And that got extended as well to, compassion towards nature, to the environment. We're on the banks of the biggest river in the world, immersed in the largest forest and jungle, the Amazon. And it was impossible not to be deeply affected by, that nature, where in the middle of a ceremony like that, you'd look up and the jungle would literally be dancing around you, coming to life in this kind of fantasia of psychedelia and sacred geometry. It was just like it was dancing and performing for you in harmony. And so once you experience something like that, you can't really unlearn it. And it gives you such a wealth of compassion towards nature in terms of environmental awareness. And you just want to make sure that we, maintain our environmental diligence and duty and care for our planet. And I'd never had these sensations before. It was really, really new. And the last one, I suppose, is the fact that, it instilled a sense of creativity in me, because I'd never been creative before. I was in this ceremony where I was looking directly up at the moon. It was shining like a lighthouse, full moon beaming right in my face. The stars were, sprayed across the sky like backlit diamonds. Behind that, there was this unbelievable pitch black vista that just went on for infinity, which was obviously, the universe, but overlaid upon that was this just exquisite geometry. And it was just creating this effortlessly. And it was telling me, and this is what I choose to interpret, that, if I can create this effortlessly, then, you can be creative too. And so that's exactly what I chose to do. I came back. I was so inspired. I wrote the book, and that's where we are now. And so it was very profound for me. It was very enlightening, and I just thought this experience is bloody brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. Anyone can do it. Yeah. Anyone can do it.
And do you know what? It's so lovely hearing you say that, because this has been a really common theme. Well, it's a theme for me of the summit. It's something that I wanted to get across, but I'm hearing time and time again with some of the interviews that I'm doing with the other speakers is that, at this point in time, we have a choice. And we, by having experiences like this, or just changing our awareness, our personal, our worldview, we get to see the world differently, and we choose different things. But most importantly, we need to reconnect. We need to connect with ourselves, with each other, and with the world at large. And, Ayahuasca gave you that. Psychedelics gave you that. Plant essences gives you that. Going for a walk in nature gives you that. For me, I think this is how we're going to move forward as a species. We need to reconnect. We need to reconnect with each other. But most importantly, we need to reconnect with nature, because we are too separate from it. So it's beautiful to hear you reinforce that as well. I would like to come to something that you discussed in the book, because I think, again, it's really relevant in terms of the theme of the summit and breaking through the void, and what many people may be thinking. And something you describe in the book is how for men there is less of a rite of passage these days, and how that was one of the things that left you feeling dissatisfied. You weren't being challenged, you weren't being pushed. Life was too safe and corporate for you. And it sounds to me as though many other men may be feeling that. And I just wonder if that's the case. Have people reached out to you? Is that a common theme that comes up?
Yes, certainly. I mean, there's so much we can learn from these plants, because effectively that's all we're talking about here, that we share in common. And I really did feel, from having left school and having left the Marines and all the adventure that I had, having joined the civilian world, that there was no rite of passage for men. Women have children, and it's absolutely a momentous event to give birth to a child. But as a guy, typically, speaking from experience, you could win a big business deal, you could win a rugby tournament, you could give a speech at the best man's wedding, but there's nothing really, really profound. Whereas these shamanic healing, psychedelic rituals that they have in South America and other parts of the world now, just are really, really important. And so I started to get a sense of the fact that, we've got a problem with men coming back, particularly young men coming back from wars with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And, if they had these rituals to go through with these healing ceremonies, immersed in nature, and have this psychedelic episode with these sacred plant medicines, it could be of such benefit to them. And I'm absolutely convinced that this could be of benefit to them. But then I started thinking more deeply about it, and the more I spoke to other men, particularly men of my age, guys in their 40s and 50s, there's so much malaise and dissatisfaction that they had, that this can really be applicable to anybody. And I truly believe in the power of this. And it doesn't have to be a quest. Yes, I went on a quest. I'm not saying everybody needs to go on a great big extreme epic quest. You can go on a mini quest. You can have a mini adventure. But I'd like to bring this point back to a book I read a few years ago, and I think it's very interesting. It's written by Jonathan Haidt. It's called The Happiness Hypothesis, and he said that when people want to make themselves happy, one of the proven scientific approaches to doing this is when they're doing something new, and when they're doing something slightly risky. When they're doing something new, it releases dopamine, the good feeling hormone. And when they're doing something slightly risky, then that releases the stress hormone cortisol. Now, the real sweet spot is if you're doing something new and risky, and certainly, my experience of all the adventure that I had in the Royal Marines, and also, in the jungle in the Amazon, you're doing something new and risky. And that, I really believe he was onto something there. Very, very interesting. Now, here's the thing. When you add ayahuasca into the mix, it's even more powerful, because we know, and there's been a tremendous amount of good quantifiable hard science behind this, that ayahuasca has an effect on the serotonergic parts of the brain. The brain, it releases serotonin, and it releases it over a long period of time. So if you throw that third element into the mix, you've got dopamine, cortisol, and serotonin, in this environment, that, it's accessible to anyone that wants to take part in this kind of rite of passage or mini adventure or quest or whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't have to be done in the Amazon. You can go to places like Spain, you can go to the Netherlands, you can have these ceremonies that last, 2 or 3 days. You can even do them in the UK. I mean, I've got some direct experience of an amazing ceremony that I went to, near London. So, if anybody is interested in knowing more about that, then perhaps I could give my contact details out on my website, and they could contact me, and I could point them in the right direction. I'd love to. But, what I'm convinced of is that this is a powerful set of tools that can help men and women that are feeling very dissatisfied, and they want to move through the void and seek enlightenment and get on to the next stage in life to become more happy.
Great. That sounds wonderful. So one thing I just want to touch upon before just asking about what's coming next for you and where you go after this amazing adventure. It's just, as we talked about in the title of the speech, it's about breaking convention, which we've discussed, but it's also about ayahuasca as a real tool for healing. And it does. I mean, it heals people spectacularly, doesn't it? With sort of long-term depression and other things that can't be helped. But you have a particular interest in helping veterans with PTSD. Can you share a little bit about that and how that's?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So it's becoming quite a phenomenon now, where, particularly in America, where their problem is a lot more acute than ours, where up to 22 veterans that have served in either Vietnam, Afghanistan, or Iraq are killing themselves, which is obviously terrible. And the normal therapy of big pharma and SSRIs and antidepressants just isn't working for a lot of men. So, there's a saying goes that veterans have earned the right to choose how they heal, and so they're now going en masse down to the Amazon and immersing themselves in these shamanic healing ceremonies with a shaman, and taking part in these ayahuasca ceremonies to heal themselves and get past the PTSD that they've experienced. Now, I haven't been diagnosed with PTSD, but I know guys that have, and I've recently come back from filming a documentary whereby there were 7 or 8 American veterans, women as well, who went through this experience, and the feedback has been fantastic. And so now they're making several documentaries. They've already made 2 or 3 documentaries, and there's 3 or 4 I know of in the pipeline. And I'm lined up to continue this. And I'm making another one with the BBC with just British veterans. So they've got PTSD, and the idea is to help them heal and move on with their lives with this powerful set of psychedelic tools.
Well, that all sounds amazing. That all sounds absolutely amazing. How can people get in touch with you then? So we've got your website on your website link on the Summit website, and people can contact you through there. And I guess your book is available on Amazon.
Yeah. So they can get me on email at psychedelicmarine at gmail.com, and also on the website psychedelicmarine.com, and Twitter Alex Seymour UK is my handle, and Facebook as well, the usual ways. So I welcome anybody getting in touch.
Brilliant. So you can carry on that conversation about ayahuasca and how people can find out more if they're interested.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been fascinating to talk to you. It's so interesting to have such an unusual angle for, getting people to expand their consciousness, think differently, have a choice of something else that they may want to do. So thank you very, very much for agreeing to be a part of the summit. It's been fascinating to see.
Well, thank you, Julia. It sounds like we've got a lot in common. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thanks for having me on.
Great. Thanks, Alex. You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye.